Our drive to create change, catalyze impact, and build relationships all neuroelectrical energy, real electrical impulses firing in our brains. Who we are depends on how we work with this energy. When this energy rises within us, we feel empowered and dynamic. But when this energy fails, we feel down, stressed, and defeated. Today's guest shares 8 codes to apply to our challenges. Her work shows us how to effectively deal with struggles, and she tells the stories of business leaders, parents, couples, and even combat veterans, trauma survivors who use the 8 codes to rise. It is a great pleasure to welcome the author of Energy Rising, the Neuroscience of Leading with Emotional Power, Julia DiGangi. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
It's great to have you on the show, and great news for our audience as well. I have a copy of Julia's brilliant book up for grabs. Just sign up to the Innovation Show Substack and you will be in the hat to win a copy of this brilliant book. Let's get started with the first thing we must all understand is that our emotions are energy. I love this quote. Our emotions are the product of a complex dance between electrical, chemical, and magnetic energies. Neuroscientists use several tools to track this brain-based choreography. Over to you, Julia, to unpack that.
I just want to start here and say I'm a neuropsychologist, which means I'm a clinical psychologist with specialized expertise in the brain. And much of my work is understanding human emotion, especially the difficult or the painful emotions. So stress, fear, anxiety, rage, anger, frustration is a million synonyms to describe our bad feelings. A lot of times we feel just overrun by our emotions, right? We feel overrun by them in our jobs. We feel overrun by them in our homes, in our relationships, on social media, in political conversations. And a lot of times it feels like our emotions are happening to us. They're just being done to us. We're a victim to our feeling. And what I think is so exciting and so hopeful about science is this really isn't true. So then the first question is, okay, well, if I want to have a better relationship, I want to master my emotions better, what are emotions? And emotions are quite literally a neurologic energy. So I know you and I were talking before we started recording, is like, when I say this, I don't mean it metaphorically. I don't mean it metaphysically. I mean it neuropsychologically. So the only reason I'm able to do my fMRI or EEG research is because of the neurochemical properties of emotions. So, we don't have to get overly academic because I really want this to be super practical for people. But I think the most powerful way to think about emotions is simply like this. Your emotions are the Google Maps of your life. They are this sacred, scientific, neurochemical, neuroelectrical guidance system that is telling you, imagine you're driving through your life and your emotions are like, at the next intersection, please turn right and immediately leave this conversation. At the next intersection, please, it's time to leave this job or turn off work for the week or whatever. And what a lot of us are doing is we're staying on this behavioral highway, paying absolutely no attention to this really profound guidance system in our nervous system. And then we end up in our lives feeling lost, feeling confused, feeling hopeless, feeling turned around, feeling disoriented. So the most powerful human beings on the planet are the human beings who know how to integrate these emotional sensations with behavioral action. But a lot of times what we're doing is we feel things, we totally disregard the feeling, we're behaving outside of an emotional context, and then we wreck our businesses, we wreck our families. And so I'm a huge advocate of emotional intelligence. I know there's so many complex ways to think about emotional. I think emotional intelligence is quite simple. It's how powerfully am I thinking about the value of emotion? And when leaders can understand this, I know this is going to sound dramatic, it will change the entire game. Because the native language, and this is another really big piece that I want people to understand, the native, universal, and most primitive language of the human being is the language of emotion. We all first came into this world speaking only a language of emotion, and to be even more direct, we were speaking a language of painful emotion. We all came out red-faced, screaming, terrified, enraged. I do a lot of work in human relationships. So I'm brought into teams. I'm brought into big global companies. I work with entrepreneurs. I work with couples. I work with parents. A lot of times what happens is people will do things and say things like, I really care about you. But the truth of the emotional energy is right now, I actually don't care that much about you. Or I'm going to say to you, here's a big one that I think people are going to really resonate with. Haven't you ever been in a room with somebody and you said, hey, like in one way or another, like that offended me or that hurt my feelings. And the person goes, I'm sorry. And you thought to yourself, or maybe you even said, I heard those words coming out of your mouth, but that felt not one bit like an actual apology. Because what that's really showing is the human nervous system is wired to quite literally read the energy of emotion. So the words coming out of your mouth, and if you think about language as a neurologic function, it's much, much more secondary. You know, we didn't develop profound language until much later in development. Then we developed emotion. So I don't care about the words coming out of people's mouth. I care about the emotional energy.
Beautiful. And you distill those emotions down to just two kinds of emotional energies, ones that hurt and ones that heal. And you call these energies emotional pain and emotional power. I thought we'd share that with our audience before we get into the codes that you introduce in the book.
Absolutely. So one thing I think is emotions are confusing, and I want to talk to you. I think we can talk about all the codes. I think your audience might really benefit from having a really interesting, I think, inspiring conversation about uncertainty. So our the nervous system's relationship with uncertainty and how do we lead through it. But emotions are inherently, when we're highly emotional, we know, again, I'm a neuropsychologist, so one of the things that we understand very clearly is like when emotions are high, our cognitive abilities drop, right? So our ability to think clearly, our ability to problem solve, our ability to strategize, our ability to emotionally regulate. So as emotion goes high, it's very common that cognitive abilities will diminish in those moments. So I was like, well, it's not really useful if we're feeling triggered or we're feeling stressed out or we're feeling overwhelmed. I can't think about 17,000 different emotions. I can't be like, is this grief? And what's the response to grief? And is this fear? And is it? So I was like, okay, the brain is the most powerful real estate on the planet. And for almost all of us, it's less than 3 pounds. So it's the most valuable real estate. We could give truly probably thousands of synonyms for emotions, right? Happy, sad, joyful, excited, elated. We could go on and on. But if you think about the brain, it's not like each emotion has a different neural circuit. What happens is the things that feel bad, whether it's fear, whether it's stress, whether it's frustration, whether it's irritation, whether it's rage, whether it's trauma, whether it's annoyance, whether it's those bad feelings are happening along the same neural circuit. So we can certainly in language, and I love words, so I love the complexity of words, but you can reduce all of those bad feelings down to emotional pain, meaning I don't like the way this feels in my body. That's it. Now, those things are on a continuum. I could be a little bit irritated and I could also be totally traumatized, right? But nonetheless, those parts of the brain are those parts of the brain. And if you really think about it, it's either feeling, I suppose it could be precisely neutral, but for most of us, we're going in one direction or the other. Either what's happening right now in my life is feeling bad or it's feeling good. So the mirror, so I have emotional pain on one side, and the opposite side is emotional power. And emotional power is all the things every single human being wants. You know, I did a lot of international humanitarian aid, international development work. I worked at the White House. I worked on U.S. presidential campaigns. So I've really worked at very macro levels, and I've worked all around the globe. And I never thought I was going to become a neuropsychologist. So fun family fact, I come from a lineage of psychologists. Our family holidays are very fun. My father's a psychologist. So I just always thought that was like his thing. He wasn't territorial about it. It was just like, I think a lot of kids want to differentiate from their parents in very natural, good ways. So I always thought I was going to be a journalist. And then I got really into political advocacy. And What started to happen to me, though, is I was all around the world watching, no matter where I was, whether I was in Lagos, Nigeria, whether I was in Buenos Aires, whether I was in Detroit or Chicago, I was seeing trauma looked like trauma. Hope felt like hope. Connection felt like connection. Fear felt like fear. So I was like, people want to feel hopeful. They want to feel confident. They want to feel connected wherever you go. So there was something profoundly unifying about our neurology. I started to think if leaders could really understand how human nervous systems work, it could be such a beautiful, transformative thing. So on the opposite side I have emotional pain on one side. On the opposite side, I have emotional power. And emotional power is just all the things everyone on the planet wants to feel. We want to feel confident. We want to feel centered. We want to have a clear sense of ourself, which I think, frankly, a lot of us are missing these days. We want to have a sense of self-possession. We want to have this sense, and what I call this, so I either call it emotional power, but what it's really about is my wholeness. Because if you think about what happens in the human experience is, I'm all good. I'm all good with the parts that I like about myself. Like the days when I'm like confident and I look good and I sound good and like the people I listen, it's all working. Like I got no problem with me on those days. The days that I really got a problem with me are the days when I think I'm pretty anxious and I'm going to be rejected somehow. I'm starting to have these fears that I don't really belong. I'm starting to worry about my relevancy. I'm starting to worry. In other words, my wholeness, my power really depends on my ability to work intelligently, not just with the parts of myself that I already like, but how do I take these parts that are more difficult and move them from pain into power? What a lot of us are doing is we're out there saying that part doesn't belong, avoid it, deny it, numb it, ignore it. Well, the physicists taught us. The physicists are about as like cold, hard, scientific as they get. They're the ones who taught us that energy can never be destroyed. Energy can only be transformed. I already told you that our experiences of emotional pain, our frustration, our fear, our stress, our overwhelm, our relationship with uncertainty is an energy. This is not metaphorical. I can put people in a scanner and tell them a story or show them a picture or let them hear something. And in very reliable ways, we see these emotional pain networks activate. So what a lot of us are instinctively trying to do, it's happening at the unconscious level. Like the brain just registers, that doesn't feel good. Get me away from it. Get me away from it. Well, the brain in some ways it's the most wildly exquisite technological device on the planet, right? So the technology of our nervous system is just extraordinary. So in some ways it's so sophisticated and so elegant. And in some ways it's really primitive. And I think this piece is really important for leaders to understand. Is I go and put my hand on a hot stove and I burn it, I'm going to yank my hand away. And I'm going to go, that was terrible. Let's never do that again. And the brain is going to organize my behavior without much thought, without much conscious thought. Stay away from stoves, be more vigilant around stoves. And if you think about it, I don't know if you ever burned yourself, but I can almost bet you haven't burned yourself 30 times, 50 times, 3,000 times, because in neuropsychology, we call this one trial learning. It was such a powerful, painful learning experience. The behavior is now organized differently. The problem with this is the brain treats all pain in some ways, and in physical and emotional pain are processed in some of the same regions of the brain too, which goes to show the brain is just wired for basically pain avoidance. The problem with this is that a lot of our emotional pain, I always joke, no one has ever come to me and was like, hey, Dr. DiGangi, I need to have a meeting with you to tell you about the one time in 1987 when this one time my husband and I got in an argument. I need to tell you about this one time 32 years ago when I had one bad job. And then ever since then, our experiences of emotional pain, this is the piece that's so important, are by definition chronic. Meaning, I'm bothered by you again. I'm bothered by you again. I'm worried about this again. I don't know how to handle uncertainty. I'm feeling triggered by uncertainty again, over and over and over and over. And so what the brain is going to try to do until we have really intelligent conversations about how to work with the machinery of our nervous system. This is why I wrote Energy Rising, to give people a clear blueprint on how to actually work with the machinery of the brain. The brain's going to keep going, let's avoid it, let's avoid it, let's avoid it. So there's a conversation I don't want to have. There's an issue, I don't want to face it. There's a thing, I'm not going to show up. Well, the problem with this, and this is what I talk about in basically Code 1, is, and I think this is one of the most important points I make in Energy Rising, it's what I call you need to pick a more powerful pain. So what a lot of us are doing, again, unconsciously and in a very natural way, is we're saying, this doesn't feel good to me, so I'm going to organize my behavior to avoid it. I'm going to avoid conversations. I'm not really going to show up fully. There's a million ways to avoid facing what we don't want to face. What that is effectively like, though, is it's like trying to buy a house in a place where there is no gravity. It's like I'm looking for the perfect house, and I'm going to know it when there's just no gravity here. Now, your real estate person would be like, so I have to have a very difficult conversation with you, Julia. This is going to require a tremendous amount of resources, and I'm very confident it's not going to work out because there's always gravity. And this is what I am on this planet to teach people. What the human experience is fundamentally about is it is about confronting resistance. It is about expansion through resistance. It is about becoming more powerful, how we meet the pain. So if I run a program unconsciously, anytime it feels bad, I'm just going to get out of it. I'm going to shut down. I'm going to scroll. I'm not going to really fully be in the conversation. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to avoid pain perfectly. But this is a phantom option because my chronic avoidance of pain, I promise you, is creating tremendous dysfunction in your life. In fact, when I'm brought into organizations, I cannot tell you how many times people will say, they'll bring me in, we're rolling out we're thinking about designing a huge employee engagement thing. The team's behavior the performance is failing. And I'll say, tell me specifically the conversations you've had with your low performers, or tell me the difficult conversation you've had with your co-founder, or tell me how many times you brought the C-suite together to really get into deep issues. People usually blink 15 times and they're like, well, one time I made an indirect comment and sort of hoped that they would understand. In other words, we say that we're leaders, but we don't powerfully show up to the conversation that create distress in our own bodies. Again, no shame there. Everyone's doing this. But if we're really interested in leading with emotional power, we've got to say that avoidance of the pain actually creates more pain. So when I start to say, oh my God, there's no option here. There's no easy button. Life is going to require me to face pain. What pain is the pain that works to my power, to my empowerment? And what I see almost universally is when I help people facilitate difficult conversations, sure, going into the conversation, they're a little bit anxious or whatever, but afterwards, the amount of power they feel, the amount of clarity, the amount of relief, the amount of conviction, the amount of connection, it really changes the game for people.
Wonderful, wonderful. Great context setter. And before we get deeper into choosing which pain, I thought it was so important to just segue onto something you said about the wholeness, because one of the biggest things people feel is what you call self-division. So they're not being whole. And this is brought through from self-betrayal. I see this so much with many of my clients, many of the organizations I work with. The same thing as you, that they're betraying themselves, their true sense of nature. They're suppressing their feelings. And I have a bunch of questions here that Julia shares from the book. And I just want to throw them out to our audience to think about this. Have you ever promised you'll do something for yourself and then you don't? Want to stand up for yourself, but you don't? Swear you'll hold a boundary, but you don't? Want to speak up, but keep your mouth shut? Want to connect with people, but withdraw instead? Want to tell the truth, but stay silent. We see this so much when it comes to innovation as well. People with great ideas that hold back. And this is the concept that I think we should share about what you call self-division.
Absolutely. And this goes back to how I started the conversation. So when I say emotions are an energy, they're a real energy. Behavior is a real energy, like the human body. This isn't a controversial statement, runs on energy. So this idea of self-division, I'm trying to make it so clear because I think once people see it, they're like, oh my God, that makes perfect sense. So if I was going to like make a jet or a plane, and I was like, I have these engines, and I'm going to have a couple of engines going in one direction, but then I'm going to have a couple of engines that drive the plane in the exact opposite direction. You would be like, I don't actually think you're an engineer because that is a dumb idea. What are you talking about? Like, why would you try to push in one way and then push in the other way? All you're going to do is expend a lot of energy and not really go anywhere. Perfect sense, right? Well, sometimes our own lives are so close to us, it's hard to get perspective on it. What I started off saying, and you're bringing in this idea of self-division, and this is precisely it, is when the energy of my emotion, that neurologic guidance system, is saying, hey, I'm really exhausted. And then in that moment, I use my behavior to overwork, to overcommunicate, to overfunction. In those moments, I have divided, quite literally, I have divided the energy of my emotion from the energy of my behavior. This is self-division. Now, we can even be agnostic to, at first we could be agnostic to is it good or it's bad. Let's just agree that there's a physics here. That if I'm saying over and over again, oh God, like, you brought up this innovation thing. I could not agree with you more. But the whole idea, once you see it too, it almost, you got to have a good sense of humor about it. It's like, if everybody was already doing it, it wouldn't be innovative. So by virtue of it being innovative, of course, some people are going to be like, well, that idea sounds pretty weird. That's the measure by which you understand it is innovative. If everyone's like, well, I heard it before, but as I start to be innovative, I start to open my mouth and share my creativity, there's going to be some exposure there. Invariably, some people are going to be like, we don't get it. And a lot of times when people say we don't get it, they don't sound soft and fuzzy. So if I had this emotional impulse for creation, for innovation, and then what do? I use my behavior to keep my mouth shut, to not innovate, to work a job that's boring my soul to a pulp. In those moments, I have engaged in self-abandonment and self-division. I have divided the energy of my emotion from the energy of my behavior. Well, the consequence of this, again, I tend to be ruthlessly pragmatic. Human energy, if I was like, hey, so I got a great idea. We're just going to run for 37 hours straight. You'd be like, that's not a good idea for so many reasons, including you just energetically can't sustain that. I got a great idea. We're just going to go we need some water conservation efforts, so we're going to start drinking water every 6 days now. It's like, that you just would get, that wouldn't work, okay? So when we're chronically out there dividing the neurologic energy of our emotion from the neurologic energy of our behavior, the consequence is mathematical. You are expending energy. There's no doubt there, but you're not moving anywhere. And so what starts to happen is you start to feel depleted. You start to feel confused. There's this sense of like, why is nothing working? I'm working so hard. This is what I hear a lot. I'm working so hard, but nothing's working. Well, it's because you're taking 5 steps in one direction and 5 steps in the other. And if that goes on for long enough, it looks like hopelessness. It looks like stuckness. It looks like feeling pretty bedraggled and just burnt out. So the importance of really understanding how to intelligently harness emotional energy, I think is the most powerful work at this moment in human history.
So many places I wanted to jump in and go, yes, sing it from the rooftops. One of the things you mentioned there about is if the idea isn't innovative enough, Einstein said this. He said, if the idea isn't at first absurd. There's no hope for it. Jeff Bezos, for example, he talks about this, that if you're going to innovate, you're going to be misunderstood for long, long periods of time. And the reason I say that is to build on what you were saying, but also to point out something that's so, so vital to your work and for transformation on a personal level or an organizational level, is that you have to be confident with yourself. You have to have your own house in order as yourself if you're going to be the leader of this change. If you're going to be an innovator as well, you have to work on yourself because you're going to be misunderstood. And then I'd love you to build on that maybe and tell us about how other people will almost be like gravity and try and hold you back because they don't want you to change.
I think you're right on. I think one of the most powerful things is, so sometimes people will say like, I've done a ton of these podcasts now, or, even if I'm like speaking, people will ask ask questions afterwards. And obviously I could talk about this stuff. Like if I had 1 million lifetimes to live, I would live it on this altar of human pain and human power and the brain. I just think it's all so extraordinary. But if, someone's like, what is like one thing I could do to like significantly increase my emotional power? The answer would be decide that you're powerful enough to be misunderstood. Decide that you are powerful enough to be misunderstood. Because what happens is we are herd animals. And since we were teeny tiny little babies, we literally regulated our nervous systems by the presence of other human beings. This does not change. This does not categorically change across human development. We know. So there's a lot of interpersonal neuropsychology, neurobiology now. So sometimes my mom will joke like, are you ever going to come up with a scientific study that when you tell me a conclusion that I didn't already know, So I'll be like, Mom, like we did like do this amazing study. This is an amazing study where we're learning that like spouses are really changing each other's nervous system. So we'll have good data about pupil dilation or skin conductance or cortisol levels. My mom's like, I already knew my husband stressed me out, But my point here is just like across the lifespan, now there's starting to be interesting studies in workplace contexts. So coworkers, again, I think a lot of us intuitively already knew this, but our coworkers can soothe us and our coworkers can dysregulate us. So there's this profound attachment. And I don't mean attachment in like a hallmark, like, I also mean it like that, sure. But I again mean it very scientifically. Like, if we want to make powerful change in our life, we've got to work with reality. One of my PhD advisors would say, it's a little bit crude, but I'm going to do it. He would go, shit in one hand and wish in the other and watch which one fills up first. So I think a lot of times we fail ourselves because we're not really working in alignment with reality. And so I think we got to say like, well, what are the changes? What are the changes that we really want to make here? What's coming up for you as I say these things?
Loads of stuff, but one of the things that's coming up is, it keeps knocking on my head's door about self-division, is that there's so many people working in organizations and they're miserable and they're disengaged. But it's because of this. I truly believe it's because they're denying themselves being who they truly could be, but also the behaviors and the values of the organization don't meet their own values. And so they have this personally, the neuroenergetic self-division, but then also the values self-division. And
totally.
So much going on there.
So, I want to talk, we got to talk about uncertainty, but I want to make this final point about being powerful enough to be misunderstood. If I need, and I know some people aren't, but I think a lot of us are profoundly people-pleasing. Even a lot of us who on the surface don't look like it, like we're not necessarily overtly fawning, but the idea that people would reject us, or the idea that people might think we're stupid, or the idea that people might be talking about us, or the idea, it's intolerable. Because what it really taps into in a nervous system way is this energy of humiliation. Like there is something wrong with me. and they're all going to know it. So as long as I say I must, and again, we're not consciously saying it. And I think a lot of times, even when I consciously say it, there's kind of people will have this reaction like, I don't do that. I don't do that. Well, there's parts of us, okay? So it's like, and we say this like, there's a part of me that wants to go to the party, and there's a part of me that wants to stay home. There's a part of me that wants to start my own business, and there's a part, right? So it's like human beings are made up of a lot of different parts. So if I say, for example, like, I'm really afraid of if you disagree with me, if I start this business, of like being a failure. It's all of me that thinks that. And when I say that out loud, I can see that it's absurd. But at the emotional, energetic level, if you want to make the change, you have got to work with reality, and you have got to understand how powerful some of these emotions can be. And if I say I'm the leader, right? And this goes into, I think, leadership in such a beautiful way, is there's a million definitions out there of leadership, okay? And they're great. And I think people have contributed beautiful things to the leadership conversation. But I'm a brain person. Here's the best definition I can give you for leadership. The leader is the person who has the most potent energy in the room. The leader is the person who has the most potent energy in the room. You want to know how this really came through for me? I do a lot of work with parents, and I have my own kids. And so, like, dear Lord, have I been tested? So I would have all these really high-functioning, bright, engaged parents that would come to me and be like, we are on our knees based on the behavior of a 4-year-old, of a 6-year-old, of a 10-year-old, of a 16-year-old, right? And in those moments, even if you don't need parent coaching or mental health care, I'm sure any of us who have kids have been in these moments where the energy of our children is so potent, because our kids in those moments really mean it, that the 4-year-old is leading the household dynamic. I've seen this same dynamic in teams. I'll be brought in wildly brilliant, competent people who have so much experience, so much training, and they'll say, like, imagine there's one bad performer on the group. All of the team's sacred energy is now fixated on like the one bad performer. So now we're talking about, we're ruminating about this person, we're perseverating about this person. So even though we're saying how much we don't like the behavior of this person, it's really dysfunctional, it's causing a lot of problems, all my energy is there. The person who is setting the energetic standard for the team is the bad apple. I see it too in customers. I'll do a lot of like coaching around customer interactions. Well, I totally know how to I'm an employee. I totally know how to hold myself powerfully until you speak to me disrespectfully. Well, in that moment, I drop my own energetic standards. I drop my own leadership, and I'm now vibrating at like, you barked at me, I'm going to bark right back at you. Well, okay. And obviously we all lose our center, but in those moments, the more powerful energy was not me. And the leader is the person with the most powerful energy in the room.
And what you said there about the energy you're giving out is the energy you're getting back, or the energy you're picking up in the first place creates your energetic response. And if you stay there and don't deal with it, like, one of the things which is incredible to me is, okay, you can't give your 4-year-old back and get a refund, but you can take away the bad apple. But people don't deal with it, and they let it fester, and it affects the group so badly.
Well, okay, and I talk about this in Energy Rising, and one of the things I think is really beautiful about Energy Rising is when they first asked me to write a book, and I got on the phone with my editor, who's a wonderful, wonderful person. He was like, hey, what do you, like, I want you to think about what you, like, this book means to you or what you want it to be. And I could have answered the question any way I wanted, but I came back and I said, I want the book to be beautiful, and I want it to be practical. And he's like, that's a very interesting combination. When I think about beauty, I don't really think about pragmatism necessarily. When I think about pragmatism, I don't think about beauty. But I feel like Energy Rising really nailed it. I think it's both beautiful and practical. So lots of examples, lots of case studies, lots of questions for reflection. But what happens in leadership dynamics, okay? And by the way, I use leadership really in business contexts, but also our leadership shows up wherever we go. So it shows up in all of our relationships, in our parenting, on social media, in our romantic relationships. So this is the biggest thing. Let me give you an example. So a team brought me in and they said, it was a healthcare organization, and they said our employee engagement scores are in the tank. Now, this organization was doing the most mind-blowing, incredible pediatric healthcare work. They were just like a luminary in the field, but they were like, we're really struggling. And so I said, okay, well, what's going on? And they say, the employees aren't engaged, nobody's inspired, people aren't motivated, da-da-da-da-da-da. Okay, well, what have you tried? Okay, well, we've tried all these extrinsic rewards. We've tried bonuses, we've tried gift cards, we've tried salary adjustments to the extent that we could, and it really hasn't moved the needle. And then what happens is when you try to make change, you really are putting energy into making change, and the needle doesn't move. The needle doesn't stay steady. It drops because then people start to lose even more hope. It's like, oh my God, we're doing all this stuff to get relief and nothing's working, okay? So I said, I got it. I got it. We're totally going to get to your workforce. We're going to get to your employees. But first, I want to talk about you. How are you? And they're like, I'm great. And I was like, are you feeling particularly engaged? No. Are you feeling, you guys have an incredible organization. Are you like, no, we are not inspired. Are you feeling, no, we are not motivated. We are just, it's conflict. And so I was having a meeting, I was having meetings, regular meetings with the full C-suite together. And then I was doing one-on-ones. In the one-on-ones, people were crying to me behind closed doors. They were talking about all this conflict. They really liked people who were also on the C-suite with them, but there was a lot of strain, relational strain. Have you ever had these? No, we've never had these conversations. Okay. So what then as a neuropsychologist, I think, well, what are emotions? Because this lack of inspiration, lack of motivation, lack of momentum, this is all an emotional phenomenon. So emotions are quite literally an energy of contagion. We catch each other's emotions the way we catch a cold. This is what it means to be a herd animal. And you don't even need me to go into the neuroscientific literature because this is true based on your own experience. Plenty of times you have been in a good mood and you have walked into a room where people were in a bad mood and felt your own energy sink like a lead balloon. The alternative is also true. You've walked in where people are laughing hysterically. You don't even know what they're laughing about, and now you're laughing hysterically. This is the neural basis of empathy. You've had an emotional experience, and now I am connected in that with you. So it works both ways. It works, and then leadership and hierarchy is also natural. Like species arrange themselves. So if you're saying I am the leader of this organization, and the reason I am not motivated is because you people aren't motivated, I want to gently but powerfully say, who is really the leader here? One of the reasons I am on fire for what I call emotional pain, and again, remember, it doesn't mean we're writhing in excruciating pain. It just means frustrated, irritated, unmotivated, feeling stuck, all that's a bad feeling in the body, is on the days when it is easy, on the days when the people are agreeing and the things are working and the customers are buying and the people are listening, anyone can lead. My leadership is forged in the fire of fierce feelings. So on the days when the things are not working, on the days when I do not like the words coming out of your mouth, on the days when I have got to have a conversation with you about an issue that I thought that we already resolved, on the days when you're asking me to be transparent with you and I'm anxious, I'm a little bit afraid about who am I in those moments? There is no greater measure of my leadership. Because anybody can lead when the feelings are easy. Talk to me about who I am in the resistance. The world is salivating for people who know how to lead through hard feelings. And I'm going to tell you something else. Don't bullshit people. And don't bullshit people not because it's a not nice thing to do. Don't bullshit people because it don't work. Our native language is a language of energy. So when someone's out there like, be like me, I'm really great. And the reason I'm so great is because I'm great all the time. And if you could just be a little, but like the vibe I'm getting from you is like, you're not fooling anyone. And you're not fooling anyone because this thing, i.e. my nervous system, has been evolving for millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of years to understand how to read energy.
One of the places that showed up so much, and you mentioned it also in the book, there's a great saying, any turkey can fly in a storm. So when things are going well, even a turkey can fly, right? And when we saw COVID and we saw the great resignation, if you want to call it that, people saw the true colors of the so-called leaders in their organizations because things got tough. And I'd love you to expand on that, because one of the things where we see this often with our audience in transformation and innovation is that there's a restructure in the organization and the leadership go quiet, leaving people in this vacuum of communication, and all kinds of thoughts or feelings come to mind in those times.
Absolutely. Should we take the long way? Because I'm actually going to write that down. Should we take the long way down and integrate uncertainty into this? Because the reason actually not communicating is because they're uncertain.
A good idea. Yeah.
The human brain effectively has an allergy to uncertainty. Okay. We pay more attention to the intelligent operation of our cell phone or now Chat GPT than we pay to the intelligent handling of the most extraordinary machine we'll ever use, which is our own nervous system. Okay. So it's worth saying that I would say one of the biggest questions I get asked is, how do I deal with uncertainty? And then, people will add their own situational specifics. This layoff, this merger, I want to launch this business, this divorce, whatever. But what they're really saying is like, how do I manage myself in a future that is currently unknown? Well, it's worth asking the question, why? Because I think a lot of times we want to get into the solving, but we don't really understand the mechanics of what's going on. Once I really understand the mechanics of what's going on and like how the machinery is operating, then I can be like, okay, this is how the machine works. This really would give me relief. So almost all human beings have some, and people have varying degrees, but there's a point where we all don't like uncertainty. Why? Why am I not sitting here being like, yeah, hope feels, people just really don't like hope. People are not allergic to hope. People are allergic to uncertainty. Why? Okay, the brain is a pattern detection machine. So the brain is quite literally in the business of taking past data and superimposing it on future situations. So what this means is your brain is moving you through your life going apple, apple, apple. There's a blank. What could it be? And then your brain goes, it's an apple. Now, it could have been a pen. It could have been a banana. It could have been a dog. But your brain predicted it was going to be an apple. Now, this is insanely adaptive. Could you imagine having to it's just, we've all had the examples, like we're driving home, listening to a podcast or like on the phone, and we just end up in our driveway. It's like, I have no recollection of how I got here. I'm just here, right? So the brain's kind of really running all this coding to help you manage your pattern unconsciously. Great. There's really only, if you think about this, one emotional state. This is so important for leaders to get. There's really only one emotional state that the brain neurophysiologically can't really tolerate. Apple, apple, apple. The prediction machine is going to predict. That's like saying the lungs should stop exhaling. It's like, again, looking for a house without gravity. It's going to do what it's going to do. So in the absence of information, your brain is going to predict something, and it's going to predict something that is going to try to make you more safe so you're more likely to survive. This is why we've all had an experience like this, like somebody doesn't get back to you as soon as you would like them to get back to you. A client, a friend, and you're like, oh my God, the deal's done. The deal's up. The whole thing's, I can't believe. We're like, my friend who I've known since I'm 4 hates me. Like, we're not friends. It's like, and then they get back online and they're like, oh, sorry, like I left my cell phone in my car last night. And you're like, oh, gotta walk that back. So it's what happened in those moments is it's like apple. And the apple now is like the customer should have responded by now. The friend should have texted back by now. And because the brain can't naturally sit in ambiguity because the pattern detector wants to close the pattern, it's going to predict. Well, it's more beneficial to our survival that it predicts something that will defend me. So if I now start to activate my fight or flight response, I can't really trust you. I gotta now, you're not going to give me these resources. I now got to organize myself in a new direction. So if we don't know first we have to understand the brain is a pattern detection machine, and the brain is going to predict in a way that optimizes survival, not success, not well-being, not happiness, survival. Okay, fine. Well, the only affect, because the brain is really running on emotional energy. I want you to think about this. I'm going to take a turn here, but it's worth taking a turn. The whole of human consciousness rises on the energy of emotion. Why? Because nothing has any meaning until you have a feeling about it. Nothing has any meaning until you have a feeling about it. So are you a good father? I don't know. How do you feel about it? Have you achieved enough? I don't know. How do you feel about it? Do you make enough money? Do you have enough time? Have you been productive enough? Is there more for you to achieve? It all is ultimately mediated by feeling. So the pattern detection machine is really running on an energy of emotion. So it's like, this feels good. This feels good. This feels good. The next thing should feel good. People like me. People like me. People like me. I would get into a new environment and predict reasonably that people would like me. The only affective state that the pattern detector doesn't know how to deal with is confusion. Apple. I don't know. I think it should be, is it an apple? Should it be a banana? Is it a watermelon? Well, the brain, because the pattern, like the lungs are going to breathe, the pattern detector is going to predict, it's going to close that loop. So uncertainty, the affective experience of uncertainty is confusion. So people hate being confused. And in fact, I would suggest to you, this is pretty radical. People hate being confused more than anything else. Because I know what to do with rage. I know what to do with suspicion. I know what to do with happiness. I know what to do with fear. But the one thing I can't really neurologically tolerate is confusion or uncertainty or ambivalence or ambiguity. Again, we can use a million semantics. The neurology is the same. So here's what happened, okay? Is I start to think, well, okay, the brain doesn't like uncertainty. The opposite of uncertainty sounds like it should be certainty. So what do leaders start to do? Well, they start to think, let me start to produce all of these external forms of certainty. So external forms of certainty will look like, I'm going to start to overwork. Because if I work enough, then I can be certain that this is going to be successful. I'm going to over communicate. Because if they misunderstand me, I really can't tolerate that. So if I over communicate, so I'm going to overwork, I'm going to overgive, I'm going to over engineer, I'm going to over explain, I'm going to over function, I'm going to overgive, I'm going to overdo. And I call this an energy rising, the overs. The problem with the overs is, this is so big for leaders, is it's not coming. When I work from an energy of joy, my work looks different than when I overwork, because when I overwork, the emotional impulse for my work is fear. When I give to people, it's very pleasurable. But when I give in the energy of overgiving, I'm afraid. Okay? So anytime I'm starting to overdo things and my emotional system is like this, I don't want to work like this. I don't want to say yes to this. I don't want to not hold this boundary. You're in this domain of trying to create certainty by overdoing it in your external environment. This is the game changer for people is, all right, so it sounds like semantically the opposite of certainty is uncertainty. So this is why when I'm uncertain, I try to produce certainty. The opposite of uncertainty is not certainty. The opposite of uncertainty is self-trust. I am most fundamentally an anxiety researcher. So the brain and anxiety disorders. So PTSD, OCD, generalized anxiety, all the things. The best definition I can give you for any type of anxiety is a disturbed relationship with certainty. Let's put it in a clinical context and then I'll put it in the leadership one. OCD, so let's take there's lots of variants of OCD. Let's say I'm someone who has a checking variant. So I have to check the door or check the stoves or whatever. Well, the first time I go, it makes me feel a little bit better. But then I start to get confused. Did I really lock the door? I'm uncertain. I go back and I check the door. The more I do this overt thing to guarantee external certainty, because is the door, is the stove, what that actually does is it actually, and this is the greatest paradox of all, it drives up my anxiety. So if that's true in the most clinical, severe cases, which it is, okay, this is not my conjecture, this is how the field of anxiety treatment works, good anxiety treatment, understand that the more we seek certainty pathologically, the worse we feel. So there's this whole other muscle that culturally right now has been atrophying. Because we live in the information age, I need to know the weather tomorrow at 2:07 p.m. precisely. I need to know will it be 60. It's like we can now get these answers to a wild degree of certainty. So then we think that all things must, and if we don't have this certainty, we start to panic. Well, that's just because we've underutilized our muscle of trust. Who do I say I am in the absence of evidence? You mentioned Jeff Bezos, or when these guys were like, I'm going to go in my mom's garage and start to build a computer out of a shoebox. Everyone was like, what? Okay, you go down. And now the whole world is like, oh my God, because, and I'm a scientist, okay, very published in the scientific literature. I'll be the first to say, you cannot hold an evidence until you first had the power to pursue it in trust. So every time a scientist runs an experiment, we don't know the outcome. If we did, it wouldn't be good science, right? So it's like I have to trust myself, the universe, other people enough to be willing to go get evidence that I don't yet have. So what happens is when I want to go back to the first question you asked is like, when the leaders are asked questions that they don't know, I think what happens a lot of times is they don't trust themselves and other people enough to say, human beings don't need certain answers. Human beings need clarity and human beings need connection. I worked with a CEO during the pandemic who was really quite extraordinary. And what she did is she was like, we're going to have meetings at a very regular cadence. And I'm going to have this meeting with you, even if it's to show up here and say, I have no damn idea what's going on, but I'm working on it. Here's the questions I'm sitting with. Here's the progress I have. Her employee engagement scores, she gave no information, because no one knew anything in 2020, right? So she's not giving like certainty, but she's saying, I am connecting with you. I am here in the unknowingness with you. I trust myself and I trust you enough to be adults and to understand like we're in a new moment in time. We can do this. that energetic standard that she set, in a moment where everyone else's employee engagement scores were sinking like a lead balloon, hers stayed constant, which is a huge win during basically early 2020. I worked with another organization, and this is really, I think most leaders want to do well by their people. So they kept meeting behind closed doors, and they were really trying to figure it out, and but they would not communicate with their staff. Well, apple, the staff's like, where's the apple? Where's the apple? Where's the apple? And pretty quick, people start to go, oh, they don't care about us. They're not invested. They're going to fire us. Whereas if they would have just come out and said, hey guys, it's not an apple yet. Today, it's just going to be a paperclip. I know that seems weird, right? Because we don't usually put a paperclip there. We're going to come back in 72 hours and talk more. The power of clarity and connection, if we're serious about leading, cannot be understated. And this idea that we need to have certainty, it's a bullshit story that's really just pathological perfectionism. It's 2024. We got to be done with that.
When I read that story about the two different leadership approaches within the pandemic, the quote by the poet and Nobel laureate Maya Angelou came to mind, that nobody remembers what you did, but they remember how you made them feel. And to the very point of your book, this leader made people feel that they were human, that they were connected, that they were part of this community, that they were all going through it together. And even that sharing, I don't have anything to share, is connection with people.
It's like, haven't your spouse ever walked in and if your spouse is just kind of quiet, if the spouse says to the other spouse, hey, I just had a day, this isn't about you, it changes the fate of that family for the evening. Why? Because you helped your spouse close the pattern detector. Oh, this isn't about me. You're not mad at me. It wasn't.
Brilliant. I will be using that in the future. We all will, if there's anything we get out of the show. I just wanted to remind our audience, I have a copy up for grabs. You're going to need it because we haven't even got into the codes in any way, shape, or form. Julia mentioned that there's so many self-reflections in the book, so many great examples. One of the ones I wanted to pull at was, one of the things I just wanted to emphasize with our audience is, many of them work in change. Many of them work in transformation, heads of innovation, heads of transformation. And there's sometimes a feeling from that person that, oh my God, I wish this place had changed. They're dinosaurs. They don't see the future. That's why understanding this is so, so powerful. Having the empathy to understand they're expecting another apple, and you're going and saying, no, we need a new species of apple here that's going to survive and going to be so, so effective. And everybody's going to go, we're so used to the apples. Don't be giving it change.
Yeah, I think you're making such a good point. And it's like, if everybody's expecting an apple, I don't need to personalize it. It's just like, okay, why wouldn't their brain expect an apple? Got it. But if I'm saying it's got to be a banana, I got to come in there. Remember my definition of leadership? I got to come in there with real potent energy. Because what happens, honestly, and quite often, is people will be like, does anybody think that we should maybe do a banana? And then there's so much momentum. It's like apple. It's like, does anybody want to do a banana? And then it's like, they don't like my idea. Nobody here wants to change. People are, I got to come in like, you guys, I'm going to blow your mind. No longer do we need to wash fruit. Think about this. You can put this thing in your bag. No longer, we're tired of red. How about yellow? This thing, you peel it and it's you got to come in with energy for the very thing you want other people. The whole idea of leadership, and this could be a whole nother conversation. I think a lot about the energy of words, okay? And because I do a lot of corporate work, a lot of work with entrepreneurs, and then I also see patients. So I'm talk therapy. Talk is the medicine, okay? I believe that words have an energy and a vibration. A lot of times, we say words so many times, we just forget their power. So leadership is a word that's been said so many times. There's just so much trope associated with it. So this is the shift I like to make for people. Leadership is the creation energy. Leadership is the I am frequency. It's the idea that I have a vision in my head and I am going to materialize it in the external world. And it is going to be so clear for people, so able to grasp that like they are going to be magnetized to this vision. I read something the other day that I can't stop thinking about is Robert Frost, before he died, wrote something in Life magazine, and it was about the founding fathers of the United States. And he said they didn't believe in democracy. They didn't believe in it. They believed into democracy. In other words, they took their very life force, their imagination, their visions, their hopes, their fears, their creativity, and built something it was fueled by their own energy. So what I'm saying here is this idea of leadership is like, if we want to lead, if we want to help people change, we've got to be the energetic standard that other people are going to calibrate to. And I talk more about these ideas of how to become more magnetic as a leader in Energy Rising, but I think this conversation, I hope that it's really helpful to people.
Julia, do you want to do a part two? Will we do a part two?
Yeah, I would love to.
We'll find an hour another day, will we?
Yeah.
Because I haven't even got near any of my notes. I'd love to do a part two as well. I just wanted to mention your idea, the creation, the believing into it. I'm such a huge believer of that. I think one of the reasons why your book resonated, and I use that word specifically because it vibrated at the right frequency with me, was because I count myself so lucky. Now, I've made many mistakes in the past. I've learned from some of them. But my life truly started to get better when I cut off the energy leaks in my life, when I stopped regretting things, when I stopped being bitter about things. And the way I visualized it in my head was this was energy that was being squandered on things. And now I have energy to create. The show came from that. My book came from that. I'm sure it's the same from you. But this is something that I really want our audience to know about, and something that, which really is the whole title of the book. It's Energy Rising.
When you said that, I got chills. Like I really felt that, and the first thing is we got to be accountable for our own energy. And a lot of times when people talk about accountability and responsibility, there's this like tisk, like you better be more responsible. Like, like our mothers are talking. It's not like that. It's this whole other like wavelength of, it's this beautiful, I get to build this. And I get to say when enough's enough. I get to say, like, this idea really matters to me. I get to say, like, I really want to connect with you. Do you know how many of us are just sitting around waiting for the other guy to come connect with us? And so everybody's waiting for the other guy. And it's like, we miss so much of this. We're only on this earth for like 700,000 hours. And so the gift of the energy, the gift of the human body, the gift of the brain, I think is so extraordinary. And like when we connect to that with like wonder and excitement, I think that energy truly has the power to change the world.
I pulled out a beautiful quote, and it's my final quote, and then I'm going to hand over to you to close today's show. Just a final reminder, I have a copy of this beautiful book up for grabs. And before I even mention the quote, where can people find you, Julia, find out about your work, hire you for keynotes, consult with you on a personal level?
Yeah, so I like most people these days, I'm on social media. So you can find me at Dr. Julia DiGangi on LinkedIn, Dr. Julia DiGangi on Instagram, and then I'm just Julia DiGangi on Facebook. I also have a newsletter. One of the things I really try in my work, and I mentioned this before, is to be very practical for people, because emotions are obviously nebulous. And I think that's one of the things that sometimes falls. I think it's incredible that people are talking so much about emotion these days. Okay, but like, how do we actually have the rubber hit the road? So I have a newsletter. You can join that through my website at drjuliadigangi.com.
Brilliant. And I will link to that as well. I have this final quote that I absolutely loved. To change, you must understand there is another worldly difference between being in danger and feeling in danger. Your tough feelings are just that, feelings. A few intense zing, zing, zap, zaps that your nervous system is designed to handle. Your nervous system packs 150 million years of evolutionary power. You are built to handle hard. And then I added this from later on in the book to remix two different bits. You said, the very things you think are too broken, too inadequate, too ugly, and too humiliating about you are not here to sink you. They're here to set you free. Absolutely beautiful. From the author of Energy Rising, the Neuroscience of Leading with Emotional Power, Julia DiGangi. Over to you to close today's show. Your final call to action, Julia.
Well, first of all, thank you for such a lovely, dynamic conversation. I really had a great time talking to you. The thesis of the book is what you just said, that every single thing that we want in this lifetime is on the other side of the feelings we keep telling ourselves we can't feel. If we want more self-confidence, we have got to navigate the feeling of rejection, right? We've got to be able to navigate the feeling of doubt. More self-confidence comes when we understand how to penetrate this energy of doubt, okay? We want more peace in our life. We have to understand how to come into a more intelligent relationship with the energy of uncertainty. We want more connection. We want more influence. We've got to understand what happens when people don't agree with us. So it's like, I think we spend so much time trying to avoid feelings that your nervous system, the entire reason it exists across evolution, is to feel hard feelings. When we understand that those feelings are not here to torment us, they're here to lead us home, our lives change in the most profound ways. This is not abstract. I have seen so many people who do the work just create entirely different lives for themselves.
Julia DiGangi, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.